As far as like the difference between, I've heard you talk about like isolated training versus integrated, and you're big into integration, which I love. I think a lot of the isolation stuff gives you like this quick little, it feels good because it burns, but it just doesn't integrate into the whole system. And it feels like guys are more disconnected when they do more of that isolation work. Talk a little bit about that difference between like why is it so important to be integrated?
Yeah, 100%, especially as it relates to the foot. So a lot of people typically and historically thought of the foot as, okay, I'm going to do towel crunches, toe yoga, pick up marbles, things like this that are very isolated. And we know that similar to, if you do just this isolated bicep curl, I would think do pull-ups or do some sort of row as a more integrative technique. Mm-hmm. But so that isolated manner does not mean that it's technically going to function dynamically during some sort of human movement. And where I look at the foot from an integrated structure is that your deep foot muscles, the intrinsics, the core of your foot is myofascially and muscle synergistically connected to your pelvic floor. So that means that your base of support and your foot ground contact and relationship is directly correlated to your center of mass and the perception of a shift in your center of mass. So this foundation center has to be integrated. It's fascially designed that way. And then of course it continues into your diaphragm. So when I teach foot integration, I'm cueing breath at a very specific moment. I'm cueing pelvic floor tension techniques. I have to actually cue tongue to palate at certain times to activate these full fascial lines so that then is trained in a way that subconsciously it will work during high level performance. If you just train the foot doing towel crunches, does not mean that, especially as soon as you put your shoes on and you're on the court, that your foot is going to be strong and going to lead to stronger glute activation. So we need to train it, understanding this neurological connection.
Yeah. I've always wondered when people do like an isolation for one muscle, it's like, how do you hit all of these muscles equally? Because there's so many muscles crossing the ankle. It's like, how are we possibly isolating each of them? Say there's 26 or whatever crossing the ankle. How are we doing 26 isolations for all these? And if you were, how do you even have that time to do that? So it's like, for me, from a time perspective, it always goes back to, we just got to integrate it all together. And so for us, it's like, let's as long as there's no injury, I want to get them into like multi-directional plyometrics as quick as possible, just because I found that that's one of the best ways to train every single muscle down there. And it has to be integrated.
100%. I actually think a lot of this isolation, maybe some of that was like physical therapy, like, okay, I'm going to very specifically target the supraspinatus of your rotator cuff or something like that, or like bodybuilding. So they're trying to actually like hit very specific angles of a muscle for definition, which those purposes make sense. The foot, the intrinsic muscles do not hypertrophy in that same way. They're not show muscles, right? And they're very co-contraction based muscles. Like the pelvic floor, I never train the pelvic floor in isolation. It's the pelvic floor with the TVA, with the diaphragm, with the obliques. So it's very, very similar to how really the core, and you said that you're doing with that multi-directional movement, which is hitting the co-contraction action of the core.